It started with the scream, not hers. His, guttural, raw, and so primal that the night itself seemed to recoil. A taxi driver found him, barefoot, shirtless, eyes wide with a terror too large for language, staggering down the side of a road outside. Basil. Claw marks covered his chest. His fingers were bloodied from trying to tear something out of his own skin. He didn't know his name, didn't know where he was. Just one word he kept repeating through cracked lips. Shadow. That's what landed him in the clinic. Shadow. The word pulled Dr. Lena Weiss from her late-night reading. She'd been studying Jung's Red Book again, half obsession, half ritual, but when the nurse mentioned the patient's condition and that word, everything shifted. Room 43. The man was restrained, sedated. Mid-30s, lean but gaunt, tattoos of serpents and roses faded along his arms. His fingers twitched even in sleep. His jaw clenched in rhythms of remembered violence. Lena sat beside him, her hand gently brushing his chart. Name, unknown, suspected heroin dependency. Severe psychotic break. Refuses all communication except when muttering shadow or anima. Her breath caught. Jung's words echoed from memory. The addict is not addicted to the drug, but to the experience of being whole for a moment. The drug brings him the illusion of individuation. Was this man not just broken, but trying, in some demented way, to become whole? The next day, he spoke. I remember fire, he whispered, staring into space. Not outside, inside, like something was burning out of me. Lena leaned forward. Your name, can you tell me? He looked at her, finally really looked. Daniel. That was the first piece. Over weeks, fragments surfaced like debris after a shipwreck. Daniel had been a musician once, then a drifter, then something much darker. A decade of addiction, rehab, relapse. His mind, he said, was haunted by mirrors that don't reflect. But it wasn't the heroine he feared. It was her. The woman in the dream, he whispered during one of their sessions. She visits me every time I'm clean. Pale skin, black eyes, no mouth, just watching, waiting. She wants to drag me somewhere. Lena scribbled notes, but inside she felt ice spread through her chest. Daniel's drawings, hundreds of them, lined the walls of his room, all variations of the same figure. A faceless woman, long limbs, always near a door. She's not real, Lena said gently. Daniel smiled without humor. Neither is your God, but you talk to him. She was stunned, silent. He leaned forward. You know who she is. That's why you're here. That night, Lena returned to her study. She pulled down an old journal of Jung's, thumbing through until she found it. The addict's hallucinations are not symptoms. They are messages from the unconscious, from the shadow, from the anima. They come bearing truth that the ego refuses. She remembered her own dream, a decade ago in her early residency, just after her mother died. A woman with hollow eyes, standing in a burning library, whispering, I am what you left behind. Lena never spoke of that dream. Until now, it had seemed irrelevant. But Daniel's story was dragging her backward, not just into his madness, but into something buried inside herself. One morning, she arrived to find Daniel's room empty, chaos in the clinic, restraints shredded, blood on the sheets. One nurse curled in a ball, sobbing. He stared at me and said, She's in you too. Daniel was found hours later, naked, crouched in the clinic's basement, his arms folded like wings. Around him, dozens of candles he had somehow stolen and arranged into a spiral. She showed me the end, he said, looking up at Lena as the guards grabbed him. She showed me what's under the skin of the world. Lena stared at him, unable to speak. That night, she dreamed again. The woman, the burning library. Only this time, The woman turned, and Lena saw her own face staring back. The next morning, Lena's hands shook as she poured her coffee. She didn't write the dream down. She didn't have to. Every detail etched itself into her skin like a fresh wound. She told herself it was stress, transference, maybe some kind of subconscious projection. But the face in the flames was unmistakable. Hers. Not as she was now, but as she'd once been. Younger, angrier, lost. In the clinic, Daniel sat in his room with perfect calm, as if the events of the night before had never happened. His hair hung in tangled strands over his eyes. When Lena stepped in, he looked up and smiled with eerie warmth. "You saw her, didn't you?" Lena didn't answer. Daniel nodded anyway, like the answer was irrelevant. "She's real, you know. The anima. She waits for men like me, and women like you. We're the ones who run furthest from ourselves." "You think the anima is punishing you?" Lena asked carefully. "No," he said softly. "She's trying to wake me up. But waking up hurts." He reached for his sketchbook, a chaotic collage of charcoal and ink, showing half faces and torn hearts. A woman whose shape morphed between mother, lover, monster. "She shows me things I'm not ready to see," he whispered. "All the people I've used, the parts of myself I killed to survive. That's what the heroine was for. To keep her quiet. To drown the truth." Lena felt the words land like stones in her stomach. Because the truth was, she'd been there too. Not the heroine, not exactly, but she'd had her escapes. Quiet, socially acceptable ones. Red wine, late nights with faceless strangers, workaholism masquerading as passion, anything to avoid silence, anything to avoid herself. Daniel tapped his temple. "She lives in the silence. You know that, right?" Lena stood. "That's enough for today." But Daniel wasn't done. "She told me about the boy," he said. Lena froze. "What boy?" Daniel tilted his head, watching her the way prey watches a predator who doesn't know it's dying. "The one you lost. The one you never told anyone about. Not even yourself." Lena's world cracked in half. She stormed out of the room, lungs heaving, heart screaming. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway like gunshots. How did he know? She hadn't spoken about it in years. A teenage pregnancy. A decision made in silence, in shame. A hospital room. A name she'd written on a piece of paper and burned. No one knew except Daniel, except the anima. That night, she didn't sleep. Couldn't. She sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by books and candles, pulling Jung's texts apart, looking for something, anything, that could explain this. In psychology and alchemy, she found it. When the unconscious breaks through, the ego's defenses, it brings forth not only madness, but transformation. The addict is not running from a substance. He is fleeing the archetype that demands his rebirth. Rebirth. Daniel wasn't losing his mind. He was dissolving, breaking down into pieces so he could be rebuilt. Lena understood now why the clinic's treatments didn't work. Why the medication failed. Because addiction, real addiction, wasn't about pleasure or pain. It was about running from the self. And Daniel wasn't running anymore. The next day, she returned to his room. He was waiting for her, eyes clearer than she'd ever seen. "I think," he said, "it's time to stop talking." "What do you mean?" "I need to go back, to the house." She frowned. "What house?" "The one I burned down." Lena paused. "Your childhood home?" Daniel nodded. "She showed it to me last night. The walls are still standing, but they're rotting from the inside." He looked at her with terrifying calm. "That's where it all started, where I first learned to lie, to hide, to shoot up, to disappear. If I want to be free, I have to face what's left of it." Lena's clinical training screamed no. But something deeper, older, whispered, yes. So she agreed. They left at dawn. 2 hours through grey countryside, arriving at the remnants of a once beautiful Victorian house on the edge of a forest. Half, the windows shattered, ivy choking the walls. Daniel stood at the threshold and whispered, "She's inside." He didn't mean a person. He meant the anima. He meant her. The door creaked open like a throat clearing after years of silence. Dust swirled in shafts of cold morning light. The air inside smelled like rot, like secrets decaying in their own silence. Daniel stepped over the threshold without hesitation. Lena hesitated, not because of fear of the house, but because of what it represented. Memories weren't bound by walls. They lived in the bones of places, in floorboards and old mirrors and doors that creaked for no reason. She felt it here, the anima, watching, waiting. Daniel walked like a man returning to a crime scene, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is where my father beat the truth out of me," he said softly, as they passed through the gutted living room, "and where my mother told me to smile so no one would know." Lena didn't speak. Words weren't useful anymore. They were like cheap bandages on gaping wounds. He stopped at a scorched doorway. "My brother died right here," he whispered. "Overdose. I found him with the needle still in his arm." Lena swallowed hard. "I was 15. Daniel crouched down and ran his fingers over the floor. "I told myself I'd never be like him, that I'd be stronger. But the anima, she doesn't care about promises." They climbed the stairs, each one moaning under their weight. The upstairs hallway was suffocating. Pictures still hung askew on the peeling walls. Family portraits. Eyes scratched out in rage or despair. A child's room at the end still had Danny written in crooked letters on the door. He opened it. Inside, a twin bed, long abandoned. Broken toys, a shattered lamp, a small closet door left ajar. Daniel stepped in slowly, his breath catching. "This is where I first saw her," he murmured. "When I was 8, in the mirror. She wasn't scary, not then. She was sad, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how." Lena's heart raced. "What did you do?" she asked. "I closed the door, locked it, and told myself it wasn't real." He turned to face her. "That's what we all do, right? We see the pieces we don't like, and we bury them. But they don't stay buried." He walked to the closet and opened it wider. Inside, a cracked mirror leaned against the back wall. The surface warped their reflections, like funhouse glass, but darker, their faces twisted into something monstrous. Daniel touched the mirror, and then, the scream. But it wasn't his this time. Lena stumbled backward as the temperature dropped. Frost crawled across the window panes. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Daniel stood frozen, his hand still against the mirror, his eyes wide, not with fear but with understanding. "She's showing me." His voice was hollow, distant. "Showing you what?" Lena demanded, stepping forward. "Everything. The truth. The night I first used. The girl I left bleeding in that bathroom. The things I stole. The people I hurt. All of it." His breath fogged the glass. "She's not trying to destroy me. She's trying to strip away the lies." Lena grabbed his arm. "Daniel, step away from it. Now." But he turned to her slowly, and his eyes were not the same. They were her eyes. Black. Endless. "I can't go back," he said, in a voice that wasn't quite his. And suddenly Lena saw something behind the glass. Herself, but different, younger, more defiant, wearing a white dress soaked with rain, the version of herself she'd buried, the girl who had screamed in silence at that cold hospital, who had signed away a life and told herself it was strength. The anima wasn't just Daniel's. She was Lena's too. Lena stared into the mirror, heart thundering. And then, in a moment that felt like stepping off a cliff, she touched the glass. The world didn't shatter. It folded. She was somewhere else. The room was the same, but not. Bathed in deep blue light. The mirror gone. Daniel standing in the center bleeding from his palms, and in the corner, her, the anima, pale, still, mouthless. Watching, Lena turned to Daniel. "What is this?" "The space between," he whispered. "Between what we are and what we could be. She lives here." The anima took a step forward. Lena's breath caught. Her knees trembled. "She wants to show you," Daniel said. "Wants to burn it all down so you can start over." Lena shook her head. "I'm not ready. No one ever is." The anima reached for her, fingertips grazing skin, not cold, warm, alive. And in that moment, Lena remembered everything. The anger, the shame, the cold, clinical detachment she'd built over years. She remembered the first time she ever lied to herself, said she was fine when she wasn't, said she was whole when she was breaking. The anima didn't judge, she simply showed. Lena collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Daniel knelt beside her, whispered, "This is where healing begins." When Lena opened her eyes, she was back in the real room. Same peeling wallpaper, same broken bed, same cracked mirror. But something had changed. She felt it deep in her chest, like a rope had snapped inside her, releasing everything it held back. Daniel stood beside her, swaying slightly, sweat on his brow. The mirror was just a mirror again. No warped reflections, no anima. Just the silent witness to what had just passed between them. He looked at her, exhausted but clear. "Now you see why the drug was never the enemy." Lena nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was raw from crying, her pulse still echoing like war drums in her ears. She hadn't wept like that since she was a child, and never in front of a patient. But Daniel wasn't just a patient anymore. He was something else. A mirror, a key, a cracked vessel carrying the same poison she had learned to sip in smaller, more respectable doses. Outside, the wind had picked up. Rain began to lash the windows, tapping out a rhythm like a heartbeat. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. When I started using, I told myself it was for the high, but that was never true. The high was just the veil. What I really wanted was silence, not quiet. Silence. The kind where the voices stop, where the shame finally shuts up. Lena sat beside him. "I know that silence," she whispered. "Mine was wine and long nights pretending my career would fill the hole." He smiled faintly. "The hole's never outside, is it?" They sat there, two wounded animals in a burned-out cage, saying nothing for a long time. Rain poured harder. Somewhere in the house, a shutter slammed open and shut in the wind. "Do you think she's gone?" Lena finally asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. "I think she never leaves," he said. "That's the point. She's part of us. The anima isn't a ghost. She's the soul screaming to be let in." Lena looked at the cracked mirror again. "So, what happens now?" Daniel's smile faltered. His hands gripped the bed sheets. "Now we decide whether we want to keep lying, or whether we face her, every day." He stood, slowly, knees shaking. "Come with me. There's one more place I need to see." They walked down the hall and through the remains of the master bedroom. The closet was untouched, still lined with old suits and perfume bottles long gone dry. Daniel moved past it all to a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. "The basement. I buried it down there," he said quietly. "What she showed me last night. The box." Lena watched as he pulled the door open and descended. The basement smelled of mildew and earth. The bulb overhead flickered erratically, casting long shadows that danced like spectres. In the far corner sat a metal box, rusted, locked with a chain. Daniel knelt before it, breathing heavily, his hands trembled. "What's in it?" Lena asked. "My journal, from when I first started using. Everything I wrote. Every confession, every hallucination, every truth I didn't have the courage to speak out loud. And one picture." He looked up at her. Of her. Lena stepped closer. Why did you bury it? Because it was the only thing I was afraid of losing, and because I knew if I ever saw it again, I'd have no choice but to change. He unclipped the chain. The lock clicked open with an echo that sounded like thunder. He opened the lid. Inside, a stack of mold-stained notebooks. A photograph, creased, water-damaged. It showed a young woman with black eyes and no mouth, drawn in pencil, just like in the dreams, just like in the mirror. Beneath the photo, a note, written in Daniel's own hand. She is not the enemy. She is the invitation. Lena felt the words strike deep. She reached down, picked up one of the notebooks, and flipped through pages filled with spidery handwriting. Raw, violent, poetic. Descriptions of inner torment, dreams of fire and drowning, letters to lost, friends, lines repeated over and over. She comes when I'm clean. She waits when I'm silent. She is me. And I am what I ran from. Daniel closed the box and looked at her with a strange peace. I needed you to see this, not because I want saving, but because maybe we're both here to save ourselves. Lena's voice broke. Why me? He stood. Because you listen, and because you've seen her too. They climbed the stairs in silence, leaving the basement behind. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky opened up in pale, blue and gold. For a moment, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. Daniel turned toward the car, but then stopped, looking back at the house. I think I'm done running. Lena followed his gaze. What now? I go back, he said. Not to the clinic, to life, real life, one breath at a time, one choice at a time. Lena nodded, and for the first time since meeting him, she believed he meant it. But just as they reached the car, a gust of wind swept past. The rearview mirror caught Lena's eye. In it, for just a second, she saw the anima, standing in the upstairs window, watching, smiling. The clinic was quieter than usual when Lena returned. Late afternoon sun painted the halls in warm amber tones, but it felt more like the closing act of something sacred. She walked through the corridor slowly, taking it all in, the sterile walls, the muted chatter of nurses, the faint scent of antiseptic. Everything looked the same, but she wasn't. In her office, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a journal, untouched for years. The leather binding had cracked slightly with time. Inside were blank pages begging for truth. She began to write. There is a woman who lives in the dark. She wears my face but speaks with a silence that deafens. I ran from her my entire life. She never chased. She only waited. The pen trembled in her hand, not from fear, from release. She wrote for an hour straight, pages filled with names, memories, wounds she'd hidden even from herself. The child she lost, the men she never loved, but clung to out of fear. The nights she drank, not for pleasure, but to forget her reflection. She didn't cry. Not this time. There was a quiet strength in putting it all down, a strange beauty in the ruin. She wrote until there was a knock at her door. It was Dr. Heller, her supervisor, mid-50s, gruff but kind. He stepped in, brows raised. I heard you went off book with one of the patients. Lena looked up, calm. Daniel Breyer. You left the facility with him, didn't notify anyone. That's a serious breach. She nodded. I know. Dr. Heller sat across from her, folding his hands. I should be reporting you, but something tells me you've got a hell of a story. Lena paused, then said, he showed me something I forgot I needed to see. That's so. He's not broken, Dr. Heller. He's awakening. And I think I am too. Dr. Heller studied her. After a long silence, he nodded once. We'll call it an unsanctioned field intervention. Next time, tell someone. She smiled, faintly. There won't be a next time. He tilted his head. You leaving? I think I have to. Because of the board? No. Because this place teaches us to numb people when they're on the edge of something real. But I want to help them fall through it. Like Daniel did. Like I did. He stood. Well, you know where to find us, if you change your mind. She nodded. Thank you. When he left, she closed the journal and held it to her chest. That night, she found Daniel's discharge papers waiting on her desk. Patient requested release. No signs of withdrawal. Psychological state calm. Substance free for 21 days. In the margin, a note scribbled in his handwriting. You helped me open the door. Now I have to walk through it alone. Tell her thank you. The one in the mirror. She smiled. 1 year later. The wind was crisp and dry in the desert. Lena stepped out of her car and looked up at the sign. The Threshold Project. A. Retreat for addicts seeking inner rebirth. Built from an old monastery, it looked more like a sanctuary than a rehab. There were no white coats, no pills, just space, silence, and mirrors in every room. She walked through the gate and into the courtyard, where a group of people sat in a circle. Candles burned in the center. They weren't talking about symptoms. They were telling stories. Daniel was there. He looked up when he saw her, and his face lit up. She walked over, unsure of what to say. He beat her to it. You came. I had to, she said. I wanted to see what you built. He shrugged modestly. Not built, just uncovered. It was already here. Waiting. The group began to sing, not words, but tones, ancient haunting sounds that resonated deep in the bones. Lena sat beside him. Do they know? He smiled. They're starting to. About the anima. About themselves. She watched a young woman close her eyes and let tears fall freely. A man, covered in prison tattoos, gently place a hand on her shoulder. No judgment. Just presence. Lena whispered, Is this what Jung meant? Daniel didn't look at her, just stared into the fire. He said the path to wholeness is through the shadow, that the soul comes not to comfort, but to challenge. That addiction is a symptom of a self we refuse to face. She breathed in deeply, and then she saw her, reflected in the firelight. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, just herself, clear, open, whole. No more running. Lena stood and turned to Daniel. There's a lake nearby, isn't there? He raised an eyebrow. 1/2 mile west. I think I need to meet her there. Daniel nodded. She'll be waiting. As she walked through the dusk toward the lake, the wind whispered through the canyons, rustling the trees like they were applauding something unseen. The anima wasn't a monster. She was the part of the soul most people are too afraid to touch. But not Lena, not anymore. And if you've ever felt that same quiet scream inside you, that ache you tried to silence with distractions, addictions, or denial, maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to turn around and listen. Because as Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept yourself completely, but it's also the only path to freedom. If this story resonated with you, if you felt even a flicker of truth inside, make sure to like, comment your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this waiting just on the other side.